Previously on All Relative, defining Diego.
So it must be very hard for you to feel like you have a family in Minnesota, but you also have a family here.
Not that hard. Delisas.
No, it's too short. That would be delisas. You want to say deliciosas.
We just need another week. There's just some paperwork problems. The lawyer tells me everything's going to be fine. And then, a week would go by and it wouldn't be any different.
Okay, who's that?
That is your birth father.
Is it more complication than he can deal with, Is it more complication than he should be dealing with?
What do you think?
I think it probably is. And I think it's one of the consequences of coming back here.
So, Diego, this was from back in 2008. You were 10, and we were visiting your birth village with some other adoptive families. And, Dan and I haven't always agreed on whether visiting your birth village is a good idea. I think the more information you have about your roots, the better.
Yeah, but Dad's a worrier.
Besides being a lot of family stuff to dump on him, the truth is that all of our kids that were born in Guatemala and put up for adoption, they are a shameful secret in their families of origin. And when we come, stumbling down here and intruding on their lives, it's sort of like we're opening that secret. And that can lead to all kinds of crap for them and for us and for our kids.
There's one remaining secret that Dan and I actually agree on. For years, we agreed not to push for information about your birth father.
My whole life, I had always heard the same stories about Cristobal.
Yeah, and because of those stories, I worried about you meeting him. I worried about what kind of doors we could open and not be able to close.
We had always heard claims that Cristobal drank too much and was abusive, but we never knew for sure. When my sister Julia died, Isabel told you guys she died from a sickness. But then some kids in the village told me a different story.
I know how she died. She was sick and she stole a mango, and her dad got really out of control, and he kicked her in the stomach and she died.
We may never know why Julia died, but really, both the things we heard could be true. Cristobal may have kicked her, and she might have had kidney disease like I did. The whole time I was a kid, I told myself that my birth father, Cristobal, was why bad things happened. In my mind, he was the reason I was adopted in the first place. I blamed him for Isabel being poor and having to relinquish her sons. He left her pregnant, he came and went as he pleased, and he didn't support the family. I had this image of him as this out-of-control tough guy with a violent streak. So when I had my own problems, Cristobal became my scapegoat. Like when I was angry and destructive, which, I was a lot when I was a teenager, I wondered if it was because I was his son. Now that I'm grown, I don't care as much about whether I'm like him or not. I just want to meet him. I have some things I want to say to him, and some things I want to ask him, one man to another. I'm Diego Shikai Luke.
I'm Lori Stern.
And from Something Else and Sony Music Entertainment, this is All Relative, Defining Diego. Episode 7, What's on Paper? I always believed Isabel relinquished me because she wanted to give me a better life, a life that I couldn't have had if I stayed in Guatemala. But I never knew what Cristobal knew about me.
I'm excited. I want to meet my dad. But you guys think that's not a good idea.
That's me when I was 16, talking to you and Dad in Minnesota.
What are your expectations?
I don't know. I feel like, honestly, he's a changed dude.
From what to what?
From some hard-ass dude who fought in a war and stuff to just someone who is trying to survive the everyday life of the economy there.
I had that one picture of Cristobal, the one Isabel gave me when I was little. It's a picture of a skinny teenager in a military uniform holding an assault rifle. And I always wondered what he was doing. So when we went to Guatemala when I was 16, I had the chance to ask Isabel.
What did Cristobal do during the war?
Isabel and Dolores told me the story. When Cristobal was 14, 2 years younger than I was, he and his father were working in another town, and the Guatemalan army picked him up. Literally, they threw him in the back of a truck. Then they took him up to a base in the mountains.
Well, Cristobal, it used to be like a teenagers, the army or the soldier, they just come, you want it or not, it's not volunteer, and to become a soldier. That's what's happened to him.
This kind of thing happened all the time in the Civil War. I mean, just imagine, you're a kid walking down the street and a truck full of soldiers pulls up and tells you to get in. He was an indigenous boy like me, forced to fight for an army notorious for killing indigenous people. Our people. For indigenous people, soldiers in the army were the bad guys. So when he returned to Santiago Atitlan years later, I can only imagine what kind of welcome he received. I mean, it just makes me wonder, what does that do to a man? When I heard the story as a 16-year-old, I started thinking. I was Cristobal's age, well, right around it, and I could put myself in his shoes. I wondered about the reasons for Cristobal's drinking and violent behavior that I had heard growing up. Maybe the war broke him in some way. I wanted to hear his side of the story. So, when we were planning our trip to Guatemala in 2022, I was feeling a sense of purpose. This trip wasn't like all the others. It was a mission, and I was searching for answers. I had 3 main things to accomplish.
Number 1.
Get a Guatemalan DPI. That's like a social security card. I needed that to get a Guatemalan passport. I plan to travel the world someday, and I want the freedom to travel as a Guatemalan or as a US citizen, because I'm both.
Number 2.
Dig deeper into my birth family's stories. I wanted to know more about Isabel and all my relatives.
Number 3.
Meet Cristobal for the first time. So, in March 2022, we got on a plane to Guatemala. The last time I was there, I was a teenager. Now, I was a man with a college degree and a job.
And when we got there, you were the reporter, and Dan and I were along for the ride.
Mission number 1, the paper trail.
Estoy bien aquí, gracias.
So we got up the first morning, and my producer Mia and I met our driver Oswaldo. He was this short, funny man from near Santiago Atitlan, and he has a great head of black hair. We're doing this to renew my passport, to get my Guatemalan passport. We were on our way to the Guatemalan National Registry of Persons, known as RENAP for short. Guatemala has a ton of RENAP offices around the country, kind of like the DMV back home. The nearest one was only a 10-minute drive from our hotel, and I wanted to see if I could go back to the States with 2 passports in my pocket.
Why is this important to you?
Like, I've always been hesitant to call myself Guatemalan. in a way, and I think this kind of validates who I am. That's kind of not really a good way to judge yourself by a passport, but I think it'll help. I mean, I've had a bunch of pieces of paper about me that I don't think kind of define me, like my report cards and my behavior reports and my medication chart, and this felt so tangible. It was something I could bring home with me.
Head north on 7A Avenida toward 11 Calle, then turn left onto 11 Calle.
After some bad Spanglish on the GPS, we got to the office, and it really was like a DMV. Get a number and wait until that number and letter combo shows up in bright lights above a window. People were standing in line, waiting for their numbers to be called. Necesito una identificación porque fui adoptado cuando...
Pero no es a nombre suyo.
Sí. ¿Qué?
No es a nombre suyo.
I can't understand. It took a minute and some help from our driver Oswaldo to explain my situation, that I'm adopted. And it was because I was adopted that I wanted to get my DPI, or my identification. I felt prepared walking in, carrying a whole folder of documents. Isabel's photo was in one of them. So was her thumbprint, marking her relinquishment of me. It was all there. But the guy behind the desk seemed totally bewildered by my papers, by my situation, by me.
Este es el primero que tengo yo acá en este. Por eso fui a consultar porque no vienen personas así.
He said this is the first time he'd met an adoptee. I don't usually get people like this, he said. Honestly, I was shocked. Like, there are tens of thousands of Guatemalan adoptees. So how is it possible that he hadn't met one? Was my situation really that unique? So me asked him, what do you think about it?
Pues realmente está bien complicado.
He said, it's complicated. Like, yeah, no shit. After an hour at the RENAP office, I broke the news to you and Dan that we weren't going to be leaving with my DPI that day.
Yeah, we were back by the hotel having breakfast.
Like, we just have to, go in, 15 days and be like, hey, you guys figure this out?
Yeah, and I just want to throw out the possibility that you go back in 15 days and they say, sorry, we don't have it yet, but come back next week, which is basically what happened when you were born and we tried to bring you home.
Right, I know.
And it was the same time of year, too. It was like end of February, beginning of March. Delay after delay after delay.
I think it's probably a little more regulated now. It seems like he could have just been like, okay, we'll just choose one and go with it. You know what I mean?
Well, when you were born, it was the same. It was the same problem. It wasn't that it wasn't regulated. It was that someone was telling a lie, and the regulators were like, "No, wait, this is all fucked up. Something's not right here." So the regulators are trying to get it right.
But I wasn't giving up yet. The most difficult missions are the ones that require a little more reconnaissance. So, after breakfast, Mia and I climbed back into the van. And we went to a different office. The RENAP Central office. It was on a busy street, taxis and chicken buses honking, vendors selling food, and exhaust fumes mixing with the smell of hot pavement. And this time, I tried a different approach. Instead of handing over the whole folder, I just gave them one piece of paper. It was the birth certificate that said I was born in Escuintla, a coastal city in the south of Guatemala.
¿De qué año es? ¿Cuántos años tenés?
Eso es de nacimiento.
¿Cuántos años tenés? 23. ¿Por qué no habías sacado tu DPI?
A couple hours later, back at the hotel, you and Dan and I went over the shenanigans again.
What place are they registering as the place where you were born?
Escuintla, I think. Yeah. So.
That's not what we waited 9 months for the form to say.
I think there's always going to be a discrepancy, and I don't think we're ever really going to know where I was actually born.
Well, Isabel knows.
Yes, I know. We can ask her when we see her, like, where was I actually born?
I mean, for their record-keeping purposes, did they write down Escuintla?
I think so. I'm pretty sure they wrote down Escuintla.
Wow.
If only it had been that easy 23 years ago. Huh?
No, it was. It was. I mean, there were 2 pieces of paper. One said Escuintla, one said Santiago Atitlan. The PGN wouldn't let you go until their records were reconciled. The new lawyer made sure that your birth certificate said Santiago Atitlan, and then we were out of there.
Yeah, I guess.
Well, if that all got cleared up, then why is it still a question now?
That is the question. Why is it not cleared up now? Why are there still multiple ones? And I think that's one of the things we're looking at is probably someone got paid off here or there to just look the other way and be like.
So they never corrected the record.
So they might not have actually corrected it.
Yeah, it's bureaucratic bullshit.
It's just fascinating that when, as an official Guatemalan, you'll be registered as having been born in Escuintla when all those 9 months of waiting to leave here, it was about getting them to say you were born in Santiago Atitlan.
But I want to ask you, does it feel like your 9 months was just wasted? Like, what's your reaction to, like, is it just funny?
No, it's not funny. Honestly, I'm a little sad that you weren't born in Santiago Atitlan because it's Santiago Atitlan, which is a place we know and love, and also because we waited 9 months for the record to say you were, and now it turns out the record is going to say you were born somewhere else.
Yeah, but, it's not real. It's just a record.
Yeah, intellectually, but, so you have no feelings one way or the other about it.
I'm not like, Escuintla, go Escuintla, vamos Escuintla. No, I don't care. I'm still thinking Santiago Atitlan is my hometown. It's where I'm from. Yeah, I'm still from Santiago Atitlan.
I think another thing that's going on for me is I can picture Escuintla and the people I talk to there. It has a very different vibe than Santiago Atitlan. And if you could choose a place to be from,
this doesn't change where I'm from, Lori. You're acting like this is the end of the fucking world.
I'm not acting like it's the end of the fucking world.
What are you acting like?
I'm just trying to be precise about what I'm thinking and feeling right now.
Yeah, okay. That's good.
The important thing is I don't care, and I know in my heart that Santiago Atitlan is my hometown. Yeah, that's what matters.
He's a man of the lake.
Lago Atitlan, that's my home. That lake, that area, I'm proud to be from there. And I know I'm Tutuhil. That doesn't change that I'm Tutuhil. I think that's kind of the big thing. It's like, Isabel is still my mother. Cristobal is still my father. They're from Santiago Atitlan. Therefore, I'm from Santiago Atitlan. Just because I was born one other place and it says it on a piece of paper doesn't mean I'm actually, like, from there, right?
You are Atico.
Yeah.
So, Diego, can we go back to the Escuintla versus Santiago thing for a second? About where you were born. I think the reason it bothers me so much is that it's like 2 different stories. I mean, you being from Santiago Atitlan, that's everything beautiful. Everything we've built, our relationships with Isabel and Dolores and how much we love the lake. But Escuintla is like the opposite. It's hot and flat and industrial. And one of their industries used to be adoption. It's where I met that 12-year-old girl, Marvin's birth mother. Marvina'd be just a couple years younger than you. I've never stopped thinking about the 2 of them. Our facilitator, Rosa, did a ton of business in Escuintla. And that's also where Isabel went to sell peanuts. It's where Rosa met her and convinced her to relinquish the baby she was going to have. You.
So, you don't like me being connected to Escuintla. It's like you feel like Escuintla is the adoption racket, and Santiago Atitlan is kind of beautiful and above all that. But I am connected to Escuintla.
Yeah, you are. I mean, you have your own story, and it's pretty wonderful. But we're also connected to the larger story, the story of international adoption and all the sides of it, including the ugly side.
The night before we're headed to Santiago Atitlan, we get this call.
Yeah, it was Dolores, our friend and translator. We were hoping she'd help you meet up with Cristobal, but she hadn't said yet whether it was going to happen or not. So you're ready for us tomorrow?
Yes, I'm ready. I just wanted to tell you, and what should we do tomorrow?
What do we know about Cristobal?
Cristobal, I think he's been drinking for a couple months now. He's not stopping. Yeah, I don't know if he's going to be there or not. Yeah.
Have you talked to Cristobal, or are you hearing this from Isabel, or how do you know?
No, I just hear from Isabel.
So, Diego, you could hear me on the phone with Dolores?
Yeah, I mean, I heard you talking about, like, what if there's a way to meet Cristobal without Isabel?
And I'm glad you said something, because you set me straight about how you wanted it to go.
Okay, basically, I don't want to meet him if it puts anyone at risk. And if Isabel is so adamant that, part of me doesn't believe he's on a drinking binge just because that's kind of what she says all the time. I think it's just her way of, like, not wanting me to meet him. At the end of the day, I think I respect her decision. Like, I don't want to do it without her blessing because I feel like she knows what's best. I get to go back to the U.S. I don't have to deal with any of the repercussions of what might happen. The family already has a tough family life, and I think me throwing a wrench in there could just make things harder. It could make things easier. I mean, they might not have talked for a long time, and now they get to talk again. I don't know. After the break, Isabel, stay with us.
I know, but the mics are in here. Oh.
Bruh. We are getting ready to meet my birth family. Everyone is mad scramble to find a place to go. Dad's getting the camera ready. Lori and Mia are getting the microphones ready.
The day came. Isabel and Dolores were on their way to our hotel, and we were trying to find a quiet space to meet with them.
Yeah, I told Dan not to cry so he don't hear us blubbering behind the camera.
We found a grassy clearing away from the bustle of the hotel restaurant. We dragged some chairs over, set up microphone stands, and then we sat down to wait. I was feeling nervous. We hadn't seen Isabel for 7 years. We saw Dolores first.
Hello, Dolores.
Hola, Lori. Buenos días.
Buenos días.
¿Qué tal? Mucho gusto. Sí. Diego, ¿qué tal?
Diego, hola. Mucho gusto.
And then Isabel came down the path behind Dolores.
Isabel.
Hola, Ángela.
¿Cómo estás?
Buenos días.
¿Quién es?
Josefa.
Josefa es
El hijo de José.
It seemed like Isabel had shrunk. I'm only 5 feet tall, but even I towered over her.
Her face had more wrinkles than I remembered. I'm sure mine did too. I mean, I'm 66 now, and she'd be in her late 50s. So much time had passed for both of us. She was trailed by a shy little boy who peeked out from behind her skirt. I thought, that must be a grandchild.
And then his mother, my sister Josefa, showed up too. and she kept him busy while we talked to Isabel. So, mission number 2, family history. I mean, when I was sick and doctors asked me for my family history, I didn't know it. Not really. But besides the medical part, there have always been gaps. Questions we haven't asked. So when we sat down for the recording, we explained to Isabel what we're doing with the podcast. One of the things is to let people know more about her life, not just the story of my adoption. So you asked her.
Can you tell us what it was like to be a little girl here in the village?
Yeah, they used to go play as like they were like playing how to do like cooking or laundry with other girls.
I guess in the U.S. we would call it playing house. Isabel told us her mother died when she was only 8. After that, she worked with her father. They would walk hours to the coast to sell a homemade delicacy called patin.
Like a local food, it's wrapped in banana leaves, a little fish, roasted fish, and soak them in tomato sauce. Sometimes people, they want it like with chili, sometimes no chili. And then that was the kind of business they used to do to make a living. And she has a little basket. She puts it in her head. That's what she used to do when she was a young girl.
There's no escaping the sadness of her childhood during the Civil War. The military took Isabel's brother the same way they took Cristobal. But then they killed her brother, my uncle.
Her mother died from sadness. She wanted to find her son, but then she was sad. She stopped eating. She's starting to have a stomach problem. She died slowly from sadness.
But, there was just something different about Isabel this time. She seemed more comfortable with us.
The whole tone was just lighter and easier, even though we were asking some pretty heavy-duty questions, including about your messed up birth certificate.
Where was I born then?
You're born in Escuintla. In a hospital of Escuintla.
Yeah, so we were sitting there with Isabel, and all of a sudden, you got up and went into the room.
I got up because I just thought, I wonder if she's ever seen my birth certificate. I went and grabbed the folder of paperwork that we had brought to Renap, because one of the pages was called my birth registration, or Registro Civil de Nacimiento.
And, we hadn't even thought of that. You just thought of it in the moment.
Yeah, I just pulled it out and showed it to Dolores and Isabel.
I don't look good here in this picture, she said.
Has she ever seen these before?
Let's do habu khabrana becha. Yeah. Yes, she's because she signed it.
I think one thing is very interesting in this is it says she's not indigenous.
Really?
Yes, it says not indigenous, no indígena. But we are Tupujil. So I don't know why they put this.
It was about halfway down on this piece of paper in section D, where you're supposed to mark your ethnic group.
Yeah, sometimes if you don't read and write and you get nervous when people, they speak Spanish, they ask questions, you say yes to everything. Yeah. She does not remember. It's been 23 years.
So if it wasn't Isabel's choice to check not indigenous, who checked that box? Was it easier to market babies who were not indigenous?
Yeah, that was something I hadn't noticed till you pointed it out. But Isabel didn't know who checked that box.
And there were other discrepancies between this paper and what Isabel was telling us. For one, The paper said I was born at home, and a midwife was there. Isabel said I was born in a hospital, no midwife. Another thing, it said Isabel worked as a domestic. That's not true. She was selling peanuts on the street.
And she seemed to think this document was laughable. Like, why would anyone take it seriously?
Yeah.
But Diego, this was surreal. I mean, you wanting your official paperwork made us ask all these questions again.
Like, who would have thought 23 years ago when you were doing this, that when I wanted to go back and do something for myself, it would impact me?
I know. It was ironic, and it was also a reminder of everything that was wrong. There's one document that says you were born in Santiago Atitlan. That's the one we paid for the lawyer to fix. And the real one that Isabel vouched for says you were born in Escuintla.
And there was Isabel telling us what the lawyer did was wrong.
I know. It's exactly what human rights groups would call an irregularity. And the sort of thing that got international adoption shut down.
And it's why I couldn't complete Mission Paper Trail and get my DPI in Guatemala City. Isabel put her thumbprint on this piece of paper 23 years ago. It had my birthplace right, but it also had a lot of mistakes. And what really matters to me is that no one respected Isabel enough to care if what they wrote was true. After the recording, we walked down to the hotel restaurant for lunch. It was a beautiful place, overlooking the lake. Noisy white birds in the bushes and wooden boats on the water. I was sitting in the middle of the table, my biological family to my right and my adopted family to my left. There was a lot of ribbing and joking in Trujillo and English. And then the waiter came to take our order.
And there was this funny moment when Dolores explained to him in Trujillo who we were and why we were there.
It's a pleasure estar aquí. To have two family, it's amazing. I'm so glad to receive you, and we are here to serve you.
Muchas gracias.
Es un placer. I'm so glad to know that. Yes, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Daniel.
Okay. Bienvenidos. Welcome.
Gracias,
Welcome.
gracias.
¿Algo más?
The waiter said he was amazed to see two such different families. I thanked him, and then I considered his words. That was what we were, two families together as one.
And then later that night,
we sat down and talked about it.
it's just so amazing to me that we just kind of randomly started recording this shit 23 years ago.
It's pretty cool. I mean, I think it's wonderful. And I think one of the things, like, after the interview with Isabel and Josefa, we went and got food, and just sitting with two families was just something like we've done before. But I was young or I was sick, and this just felt like looking out over the lake from Santiago Atitlan, looking at this beautiful place surrounded by my adoptive family and my birth family. It was just like, this is so unique. This is so cool.
It was joyful. It was kind of amazing that these worlds were sitting at the table, sharing a meal and laughing and having a good time and relaxed. And I'm like, I looked at you and I'm like, that's you. You made this happen.
Like sitting next to my birth family and sitting next to my adoptive family and cracking jokes with you, Lori, and then Isabel taps my shoulder and is talking to me, and I have no idea what she's saying. Like, she just talked to me even when Dolores wasn't translating. I was like, I was trying to understand, but she was just talking to me like I was part of the family, one of her kids, and I really felt accepted. I think hearing her say, "You're my son," I think this was a big affirmation that I am Trujillo. I'm part of this family, and this is my home. You know, I belong here.
This was kind of the first time, I will say, where I felt like she talked to me as my mother. We talked about Cristobal. It was very open. It was talking with me. It wasn't through someone else. I think this really made the relationship much better than it's ever been.
She seems so much happier today than she ever has in the past. She's laughing and, making jokes. And
hearing Sutuhil just being spoken like it's no big deal was just so fucking cool. I mean, it's, in a way, very relieving for me, I think, because I've carried a lot of guilt knowing I don't speak Sutuhil, and I'm probably not going to marry a Sutuhil woman, have Sutuhil kids, and how am I, my legacy is not going to be Sutuhil. And then I always remember, I have family here, they're going to carry on that tradition. It doesn't end with me. And I think the Sutuhil people, indigenous people, have been oppressed for so long, for hundreds of years. And then I'm born and I go to the US, and the irony is, I oppress my indigenous identity. I want to do everything I can to be American. Why was I doing that to myself? That was just so...
Well, I also think it's, for you, it's a changing thing. You were a rebellious adolescent with an extra heaping of problems and challenges, and, that's just part of growing up. And now you're grown, and it's going to feel different.
Yeah, I mean... I'm finally gotten through everything, all the shit I've gone through, and I'm kind of at peace. I feel comfortable with myself and with who I am. I'm still, working on that, but it's not something that I'm having to battle cancer and kidney disease and simultaneously work on my identity and adoption. So it's kind of I can just be in the moment, be free. I was thinking all of this started just I was so thankful, wanting to thank you guys for trying to do all these things for me, but I'm sure at sometimes even you, Lori, and you, Dan, both questioned what you were doing
every day.
Well, I always acted sure, but I was never sure. But I'm really curious what Dan, who always acted worried, what his reaction to this particular trip is.
Well, I'm really I'm really proud of you. I'm so proud of how you're handling this, and how you've come through all the shit that you've come through. Fuck me. I always knew that, when we adopted you, it was a temporary thing. You were going to be ours temporarily, and we were going to raise you, and then we were going to send you out into the world, and you were going to be your own person. And I am just so happy to see that, you are embracing this. We have led you here, and you have embraced it. And I am really, really happy about that.
So at the end of the day, everything seemed like a happy ending. But I still had one more mission to complete. And that had come up when I asked Isabel if she had any questions for me.
Bisan certa, bisan certa, but yeah, it's like she says she's proud of you, you're the son of Isabel, and you feel this feeling of community as an indigenous person. She's happy about it. But her question, what do you think about Cristobal? As a father, he drinks all the time.
Yes. I'm very interested to meet him because I think he deserves to have his story told as well, his side of the story. That's why I'm very want to meet him so much, because I feel like not knowing him, I'm sort of missing a piece of me. Isabel told me that Cristobal knew I was in town, but she couldn't promise he would be in any shape to meet me. I think we go try
when you have time, yeah.
And you can tell her, please, that I will not meet him without her blessing. We didn't know what would happen with Cristobal, but it seemed like Isabel was okay with us meeting. It was more like she just didn't know if he would show. Next time on All Relative, Defining Diego. What if he meets us outside?
Cause why?
What if he meets us outside? I just want to be ready.
It's what I was trying to tell you back in 1999 when Diego was a little tiny baby.
I think it really also has filled a bit of that kind of void, I would say, being part of the daily, all the traditions, speaking the language now.
People might ask me where you get this name from, and I can explain to them this is from my father. All Relative, Defining Diego is a production of Something Else and Sony Music Entertainment.
It's written and hosted by me, Lori Stern.
And me, Diego Shikai Luke.
Mia Warren is our senior producer.
Associate producers are India Whitkin and Kyra Asabe Bonsu.
Executive producers are Lizzie Jacobs, Jude Kampfner, and Tom Koenig.
Lizzie Jacobs is our editor.
Production management help from E.K. Egbatola and Lily Hamley.
Dara Hirsch is our engineer. And we had additional mixing by Sam Baer. Our theme song was composed by Gautam Srikishan.
Fact-checking by Natsumi Ajisaka.
Translation by Dolores Watson and Alex Petse. No relation.
Eric Mann is our adoptee consultant.
And a special thanks to my dad, Dan Luke. Thank you for being my dad. If you love the show, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts.